You'll never amount to anything more than a failed entrepreneur who bit off more than she could chew. My sister Jessica's words still echo in my mind as I stare at the glossy Forbes magazine cover featuring my face under the headline, "The Phoenix of Austin, How Sarah Martinez Revolutionized Waste Management." The irony of holding this magazine in the same coffee shop where Jessica had delivered her crushing verdict 18 months ago wasn't lost on me. That day, she had looked at me across this very table with the same condescending expression she'd perfected since childhood, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her designer coffee cup as she explained why my bankruptcy was proof of my incompetence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning everything unraveled started like any other Tuesday at EcoWrap Solutions. I was 37 years old, standing in our East Austin warehouse at 6 in the morning, watching the sunrise paint the skyline orange through the industrial windows. The smell of cardboard and biodegradable materials filled the air as our small team of 12 employees prepared for another day of manufacturing sustainable packaging solutions. I had built this company from nothing, starting in my garage 3 years earlier with a simple mission to replace plastic packaging with innovative, compostable alternatives. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've always been the type of person who sees solutions where others see problems. Growing up in a Mexican-American family in Austin, I learned the value of hard work from my parents, Maria and Carlos, who had built their small restaurant chain, Sabor Auténtico, from a single food truck. They taught me that success wasn't about having the perfect plan, it was about adapting when plans fell apart. That morning in the warehouse, I had no idea how much I would need that lesson. The first sign of trouble came at 8:30 when my phone rang. It was David Carlson from GreenGrocer Corp, our largest client who accounted for 60% of our revenue. His voice was strained as he delivered news that would change everything. Due to unexpected regulatory changes in their supply chain, they were terminating our contract immediately. 18 months of custom packaging development, gone overnight. The contract that was supposed to sustain us for the next 3 years had vanished in a single phone call. I sat in my tiny office, surrounded by prototypes and sustainability awards, trying to process what this meant. Without GreenGrocer's monthly payments, we couldn't cover our loan obligations, employee salaries, or the massive order of raw materials that had arrived just 2 days earlier. The beautiful warehouse space we'd moved into 6 months prior suddenly felt like a monument to my overconfidence. I had expanded too quickly, trusted too completely, and now everything was crashing down around me. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of desperate phone calls to potential investors, emergency meetings with our bank, and sleepless nights spent running financial projections that always ended with the same devastating conclusion. EcoWrap Solutions was finished. The sustainable packaging revolution I had dreamed of leading would have to wait for someone else, someone smarter, someone who didn't make the mistake of putting all their faith in a single client relationship. By month's end, I was sitting across from bankruptcy attorney Margaret Foster, signing papers that officially dissolved the company I had poured my heart, soul, and life savings into. The warehouse was empty, the equipment sold to cover debts, and my 12 employees had moved on to new jobs. The failure felt personal and public in a way that made every interaction painful. Austin's entrepreneurship community is tight-knit, and news of EcoWrap's collapse spread quickly through networking events and industry circles. The weight of failure pressed down on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the financial loss, though watching my savings account dwindle to double digits was terrifying enough. It was the loss of identity, the questioning of every decision I'd made, the way people looked at me with a mixture of pity and judgment at social gatherings. I had gone from being Sarah Martinez, innovative entrepreneur, to Sarah Martinez, cautionary tale. My sister Jessica had watched this entire collapse from her air-conditioned corner office downtown, where she worked as a mergers and acquisitions attorney for one of Austin's most prestigious law firms. At 35, she had everything I thought I wanted: a six-figure salary, a downtown condo with skyline views, a BMW, and the kind of professional respect that came with never taking risks. While I was cleaning out my warehouse and figuring out how to pay rent, Jessica was closing million-dollar deals and earning partnership track recognition. The family dynamics that had shaped us since childhood came into sharp focus during my business collapse. Jessica had always been the sensible one, the one who colored inside the lines and followed conventional paths to success. She had graduated law school with honors, joined an established firm, and methodically climbed the corporate ladder. I was the dreamer, the one who started businesses in high school, who majored in environmental engineering because I wanted to solve climate change, who believed that taking risks was the only way to create meaningful change. Our parents tried to remain neutral, but I could see the worry in their eyes during family dinners. They had supported my entrepreneurial dreams, even investing $20,000 from their restaurant profits into EcoWrap's initial inventory. Now that money was gone, along with their daughter's confidence and their own retirement security. The guilt of losing their investment weighed on me almost as heavily as my own losses. 3 months after the bankruptcy filing, Jessica suggested we meet for coffee to discuss my future. I should have known from her tone that this wasn't going to be a supportive sister conversation. She chose the trendy coffee shop in South Austin where we used to meet when EcoWrap was thriving, back when she would half listen to my business updates while scrolling through legal briefs on her phone. This time she had my full attention and a message she'd clearly rehearsed. She arrived precisely on time, her dark hair pulled back in the severe bun she wore to court, dressed in the kind of expensive suit that announced her success before she even spoke. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, having spent the morning helping my parents with inventory at their restaurant. The contrast between us felt deliberate and pointed. Jessica ordered her usual oat milk cortado and waited until we were seated before launching into what felt like a prepared statement. She spoke about practical realities and financial responsibilities, about how entrepreneurship wasn't for everyone, and how there was no shame in admitting defeat. Her words were clinically precise, delivered with the same tone she probably used when explaining why merger deals fell through. The conversation that followed would replay in my mind for months. Jessica systematically dismantled every aspect of my business approach, from my expansion timeline to my client concentration risk. She questioned my decision-making process, my financial planning, and ultimately my fitness for entrepreneurship altogether. According to her analysis, EcoWrap's failure wasn't bad luck or market forces. It was inevitable given my inexperience and unrealistic expectations. What hurt most wasn't the criticism of my business decisions, though that stung enough. It was the way she dismissed my entire vision for sustainable packaging as naive idealism. Climate change was a real problem that required real solutions, but according to Jessica, my approach was too emotional and not sufficiently grounded in market realities. She had charts and industry reports to support her arguments, downloaded onto her tablet and presented with the same confidence she brought to corporate presentations. The final blow came when she outlined what she called a realistic path forward for my career. She had spoken with contacts at several Austin companies that needed environmental compliance consultants, safe, salaried positions where I could use my engineering background without the risks of entrepreneurship. She had even arranged informational interviews, pending my agreement to pursue stable employment instead of chasing entrepreneurial fantasies. Jessica's plan for my future was logical, safe, and completely soul-crushing. She genuinely believed she was helping me, protecting me from further failure by steering me toward conventional success. In her worldview, my bankruptcy was evidence that I wasn't cut out for business ownership, and the kindest thing she could do was help me accept that reality before I caused more damage to myself and our family. I listened to her presentation in stunned silence, watching her flip through screenshots of job postings and salary ranges. This was my sister, someone who had known me my entire life, reducing my dreams and ambitions to a case study in professional overreach. The worst part was seeing the genuine concern in her eyes, the way she believed she was saving me from myself. When I finally found my voice, I asked if she really thought I should give up on building something meaningful, on trying to solve real environmental problems through innovation. Her response was immediate and devastating. She looked me directly in the eyes and said I needed to accept that entrepreneurship required a specific type of person with specific skills. And my bankruptcy had proven I didn't possess those qualities. The words hung between us like a wall. 3 years of building eco-wrap, 18-hour days developing biodegradable packaging solutions, relationships with suppliers and customers, the small victories and incremental progress toward sustainability, goals, all of it reduced to evidence of my fundamental inadequacy. Jessica wasn't being cruel, which somehow made it worse. She was being honest, at least from her perspective, about my limitations and the necessity of accepting them. I left that coffee shop feeling more defeated than I had even during the bankruptcy proceedings. Financial failure was one thing. Family rejection of my core identity was something else entirely. Jessica had articulated doubts that had been gnawing at me since EcoWrap's collapse, fears that maybe I really wasn't cut out for the entrepreneurial path I'd chosen. Maybe she was right. Maybe the sensible thing was to find a stable job, rebuild my savings, and leave innovation to people who were actually qualified. For the next month, I went through the motions of exploring the conventional opportunities Jessica had arranged. I had coffee meetings with environmental consultants and compliance managers, toured corporate offices with beige cubicles and motivational posters, and listened to hiring managers describe career advancement paths that felt like prisons. Every interaction reinforced how far I'd fallen from my original ambitions and how limited my options had become. The breaking point came during an interview with a mid-sized engineering firm that specialized in regulatory compliance for manufacturing companies. The hiring manager, a well-meaning man in his 50s, explained how my bankruptcy might actually be an asset in their business development efforts. Failed entrepreneurs, he said, brought a realistic perspective to risk assessment that could help clients avoid similar mistakes. I would be living proof of what happened when businesses didn't properly manage their exposure. Sitting in that sterile conference room, listening to my failure being repackaged as a selling point for conservative business practices, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't who I was or who I wanted to become. Jessica's plan for my future might be safe and logical, but it was also a betrayal of everything I believed about innovation, problem solving, and the necessity of taking risks to create meaningful change. That evening, I drove out to the hill country where EcoWrap's original manufacturing facility had been located. The building was empty now, leased to a different company, but I sat in the parking lot remembering the excitement I'd felt when we first signed that lease. The vision hadn't been wrong. The execution had been flawed. There was a difference, and that difference mattered more than I'd realized during the darkest months of bankruptcy and family criticism. The idea that would eventually become WasteWise analytics started forming that night, sitting in my car watching the sunset over the Texas hills. Instead of manufacturing physical products like packaging, what if I could use technology to help companies reduce waste more efficiently? What if the real solution wasn't better materials, but better data about how materials were being used and discarded? The seed of a new approach was taking root, one that would prove Jessica's assessment of my capabilities spectacularly wrong. The following weeks blurred together as I dove headfirst into researching waste management inefficiencies across different industries. I spent countless hours in Austin's public library, poring over environmental impact studies and corporate sustainability reports, trying to understand why so many companies struggled to reduce their waste footprints, despite having clear financial incentives to do so. The pattern that emerged was striking. Most businesses simply didn't have access to real-time data about their waste streams, making optimization nearly impossible. I started reaching out to former contacts from my eco-wrap days, not to ask for favors or investment, but to understand their current waste management challenges. The conversations were eye-opening. Manufacturing companies were spending thousands of dollars monthly on waste disposal without understanding which processes generated the most waste. Restaurants threw away perfectly good food because they couldn't predict customer demand accurately. Retail chains had no visibility into packaging waste across their supply chains. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that artificial intelligence could solve these problems in ways that traditional consulting never could. Machine learning algorithms could analyze patterns in waste generation, predict optimal inventory levels, and identify inefficiencies that human analysis missed. The technology existed, but nobody was applying it specifically to waste reduction in a comprehensive, scalable way. My savings had dwindled to almost nothing, so I took a part-time job at a local environmental consulting firm to cover basic expenses while developing my business concept. The work was mind-numbing, mostly reviewing compliance documents and filing regulatory reports, but it gave me access to real-world waste management data and a steady paycheck. My coworkers treated me with polite sympathy, knowing about EcoWrap's failure and assuming I was there permanently. During lunch breaks and evenings, I worked on developing the framework for what would become WasteWise analytics. I taught myself Python programming through online courses, spending late nights writing code that could analyze waste data patterns. My parents' restaurant became an informal testing ground where I tracked food waste, supplier packaging, and customer behavior to refine my algorithms. The breakthrough came 6 months after my conversation with Jessica, when I connected with Robert Davis, my former operations manager from EcoWrap. He had landed a position with a mid-sized food distribution company and was frustrated by their waste management inefficiencies. When I explained my new concept, his eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm I remembered from our EcoWrap days. Robert's company was throwing away nearly 30% of their fresh produce due to poor demand forecasting and inventory management. They knew this was a problem but had no systematic way to address it. I offered to develop a custom analytics solution for them in exchange for access to their data and a small pilot budget. It was exactly the kind of real-world testing environment I needed to prove my concept. The pilot project consumed every spare moment I had for the next 3 months. I analyzed 2 years of their sales data, supplier delivery schedules, weather, patterns, and local event calendars to build predictive models for produce demand. The initial results were promising but not revolutionary. Then I started incorporating external data sources, social media sentiment around healthy eating, local restaurant opening schedules, even college semester calendars that affected student buying patterns. The algorithm's accuracy improved dramatically. Within 6 weeks of implementation, Robert's company had reduced their produce waste by 43% while maintaining full inventory availability. The cost savings were substantial, but more importantly, the environmental impact was measurable and significant. We had prevented nearly 2 tons of food from entering landfills while helping the company operate more efficiently. Word of our success spread quickly through Austin's business community. Robert's enthusiasm was infectious as he shared results with colleagues and industry contacts. I started receiving inquiries from other companies interested in similar solutions. The difference between this response and my experience with EcoWrap was striking. Instead of trying to convince businesses they needed sustainable packaging, I was solving problems they already knew they had. The validation felt incredible, but I was still operating on a shoestring budget from my spare bedroom. I needed capital to develop the platform properly and scale beyond custom solutions for individual clients. The traditional venture capital route felt impossible given my recent bankruptcy, but I had learned about a new startup incubator program at the University of Texas that focused specifically on sustainability technology. The application process for the incubator was grueling. I had to present my business plan to a panel of professors, successful entrepreneurs, and environmental scientists. Standing in that conference room, explaining how artificial intelligence could revolutionize waste management, I felt more confident than I had in months. This wasn't just about proving Jessica wrong anymore. This was about building something that could make a real difference. The questions came fast and pointed. How would I compete with established consulting firms? What barriers prevented large companies from developing similar solutions internally? How could I scale personalized algorithms across different industries? I answered each question drawing on everything I had learned from EcoWrap's failure and the pilot project's success. 3 weeks later, I received an acceptance email that changed everything. The incubator would provide a small initial investment, office space, mentorship, and most importantly, access to a network of potential customers and partners. I was finally ready to leave my consulting job and focus entirely on building WasteWise. Analytics. Moving into the incubator space felt like a homecoming. The energy was electric, filled with passionate entrepreneurs working on solutions to real problems. My office was tiny, barely large enough for a desk and whiteboard, but it was mine. The walls were covered with data visualizations and algorithm flowcharts instead of the compliance posters that had decorated my consulting firm cubicle. The first major validation came when Michael Thompson, a serial entrepreneur who mentored incubator companies, took interest in WasteWise. Michael had built and sold 2 successful software companies and understood both the technical challenges and market opportunities in enterprise analytics. His experience complemented my domain expertise perfectly. Michael's involvement transformed how I thought about scaling the business. Instead of developing custom solutions for each client, we would build a platform that could be configured for different industries while maintaining the underlying analytical capabilities. The software would learn from each implementation, becoming more accurate and valuable over time. The partnership with Michael also opened doors to larger potential customers. His network included executives at major corporations who were under pressure to meet sustainability goals but lacked the tools to measure and improve their environmental performance effectively. These weren't early adopters looking for experimental solutions. They were established companies with real budgets and urgent needs. Our first enterprise client was a regional grocery chain struggling with food waste across 47 locations. The complexity was exponentially greater than Robert's single distribution center, but the potential impact was correspondingly larger. We spent 4 months developing algorithms that could account for local demographics, seasonal variations, promotional schedules, and supply chain logistics across multiple geographic markets. The implementation required every skill I had developed during the EcoWrap years, plus new capabilities in machine learning and enterprise software deployment. There were nights when I questioned whether we had taken on too much complexity too quickly. The pressure was immense, knowing that failure with this client could derail WasteWise before it really got started. Jessica called me during this period, ostensibly to check on my progress, but clearly skeptical about my latest venture. She had heard through mutual friends that I was working on another startup and wanted to make sure I wasn't repeating the same mistakes that had led to EcoWrap's bankruptcy. Her tone was polite but condescending, the way someone might discuss a gambling addiction or other destructive behavior. I described WasteWise's mission and early success, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. In her view, I was simply finding more sophisticated ways to avoid accepting the limitations that my bankruptcy had revealed. She reminded me that the consulting job offers were still available if I wanted to pursue something more stable and realistic. The conversation crystallized my determination to prove that EcoWrap's failure had been a learning experience, not a verdict on my capabilities. Jessica's skepticism wasn't malicious, but it represented the broader assumption that entrepreneurial failure indicated fundamental incompetence rather than the normal cycle of innovation and iteration. The grocery chain project became my obsession. I worked 18-hour days refining algorithms, analyzing edge cases, and ensuring the system could handle the complexity of real-world operations. The technical challenges were immense, but solving them felt like vindication of every risk I had taken and every setback I had endured. When we finally launched the full system across all 47 locations, the results exceeded even my optimistic projections. Food waste decreased by 38% in the first quarter, saving the company over $200,000 while preventing hundreds of tons of food from reaching landfills. More importantly, customer satisfaction increased because products were fresher and more consistently available. The success with the grocery chain attracted attention from other major retailers and food service companies. Instead of cold calling potential clients or begging for meetings, I was fielding inbound inquiries from companies that had heard about our results through industry networks. The transformation from desperate entrepreneur to sought-after solution provider felt surreal. Media attention followed business success. Local Austin publications wrote articles about WasteWise's innovative approach to sustainability challenges. Industry trade magazines featured case studies of our implementations. Environmental organizations invited me to speak at conferences about the intersection of technology and waste reduction. Each piece of coverage felt like a small victory against the narrative that had surrounded EcoWrap's failure. Instead of being known as the entrepreneur who had crashed and burned, I was becoming recognized as someone who had learned from setbacks and developed more effective solutions. The contrast with Jessica's prediction about my entrepreneurial future couldn't have been starker. The real breakthrough came when Forbes reached out about including WasteWise in a feature article about innovative sustainability companies. The journalist, Emma Rodriguez, had been tracking emerging technologies in environmental solutions and was impressed by our rapid growth and measurable impact. She wanted to profile companies that were moving beyond awareness campaigns to deliver concrete results. The interview process was extensive. Emma spent a full day at our offices, observing team meetings, reviewing client case studies, and understanding the technical details of our platform. She interviewed Michael, Robert, and several of our clients to verify the results we claimed and understand the broader market impact of our approach. 3 weeks later, Emma called with news that would change everything again. Forbes had decided to feature WasteWise Analytics on the cover of their sustainability innovation issue, with me as the primary subject. The article would highlight how artificial intelligence was revolutionizing environmental solutions and position WasteWise as a leader in the emerging waste analytics market. The photo shoot took place at Austin's newest luxury hotel, with the city skyline providing a backdrop that symbolized growth and innovation. Wearing a professional blazer that I had borrowed from a friend, I tried to project the confidence and authority that the Forbes cover demanded, while struggling to process how dramatically my circumstances had changed in just 18 months. Standing on that rooftop terrace, looking out over the city where EcoWrap had failed and WasteWise was thriving, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The bankruptcy had been devastating, but it had also forced me to develop a deeper understanding of market needs and business fundamentals. Jessica's criticism had been painful, but it had motivated me to prove that failure could be a foundation for greater success. The Forbes issue hit newsstands on a Tuesday morning in November. I bought a copy from the same coffee shop where Jessica had delivered her verdict about my entrepreneurial future, sitting at the same table where she had explained why I should accept my limitations and pursue conventional employment. The symbolic weight of that moment wasn't lost on me as I held the magazine with my face on the cover. My phone started ringing immediately. Investment firms wanted to discuss funding rounds. Major corporations inquired about enterprise implementations. Speaking bureaus offered lucrative opportunities to share WasteWise's story at business conferences and university programs. The validation was intoxicating. But what mattered most was the message it sent about the nature of entrepreneurial success. Failure wasn't a permanent condition or evidence of fundamental inadequacy. It was part of the iterative process of building something meaningful, a learning experience that could inform better decisions and more resilient business models. Jessica texted me that afternoon, a simple message congratulating me on the Forbes cover. No acknowledgement of her earlier predictions, no admission that she had been wrong about my capabilities, just a brief note that felt like grudging recognition of an unexpected outcome. Her response was typical of someone who viewed success through a legal framework where outcomes were either victories or defeats, with little understanding of the complex journey between those endpoints. The Forbes article generated more attention than I had anticipated. Wastewise's website crashed from traffic volume. Our email inbox filled with partnership proposals, client inquiries, and speaking requests. The company that had started as a desperate attempt to rebuild after bankruptcy was suddenly positioned as a leader in an emerging market segment. Michael and I spent the following weeks fielding investor interest and planning our next phase of growth. The artificial intelligence capabilities that had seemed experimental 18 months earlier were now recognized as competitive advantages in a rapidly expanding market. Companies across every sector were under pressure to demonstrate environmental responsibility, and Wastewise offered measurable solutions rather than aspirational commitments. The irony of my transformation wasn't lost on me as I prepared for a speaking engagement at South by Southwest, Austin's premier innovation conference. 2 years earlier, I had been cleaning out EcoWrap's warehouse and wondering if I would ever work in sustainability again. Now I was presenting Wastewise's vision to an audience of entrepreneurs, investors, and technology leaders who were eager to understand how artificial intelligence could address environmental challenges. Standing on that SXSW stage, looking out at hundreds of engaged faces, I realized that Jessica's assessment of my entrepreneurial fitness had been fundamentally flawed. She had mistaken a single business failure for evidence of permanent inadequacy, unable to distinguish between poor execution and invalid vision. EcoWrap had failed because of strategic mistakes and market timing, not because I lacked the ability to build successful companies. The question and answer session after my presentation was energizing. Audience members wanted to understand how other entrepreneurs could apply similar approaches to their sustainability challenges. Investors asked about market opportunities and competitive positioning. Students inquired about career paths in environmental technology. Each question reinforced how much the conversation around sustainability had evolved since EcoWrap's early days. Environmental solutions were no longer viewed as niche markets for idealistic entrepreneurs. They were recognized as essential components of competitive business strategy, driven by regulatory requirements, consumer preferences, and operational efficiency opportunities. Wastewise had succeeded not despite the lessons learned from EcoWrap's failure, but because of them. The bankruptcy had forced me to develop a more sophisticated understanding of market validation, client concentration risk, and financial management. The criticism had motivated deeper research into customer needs and competitive differentiation. The setbacks had built resilience and determination that conventional success might never have developed. 3 months after the Forbes cover story, Wastewise closed a Series A funding round that valued the company at $12 million. The investors included several prominent venture capital firms that specialized in environmental technology, along with strategic partners from the retail and food service industries. The funding would allow us to expand into new market segments and develop additional artificial intelligence capabilities. The investment announcement generated another wave of media coverage, this time focusing on the broader market validation for waste analytic solutions. Industry analysts predicted rapid growth in the environmental technology sector, driven by corporate sustainability commitments and regulatory requirements. Wastewise was positioned as a leader in this emerging market, with proven results and scalable technology. Jessica called me the evening the funding announcement appeared in the Austin Business Journal. For the first time since EcoWrap's bankruptcy, her tone was genuinely congratulatory rather than politely skeptical. She had clearly underestimated both the market opportunity and my ability to execute against it. her legal training had prepared her to analyze existing frameworks and precedents, but not to recognize emerging patterns and possibilities. Our conversation was brief and somewhat awkward, as if she was unsure how to relate to the successful entrepreneur I had become. The dynamic between us had shifted fundamentally. I was no longer the failed sister seeking approval and guidance from the stable professional. I was building something significant while she continued optimizing existing corporate structures. The transformation felt complete when Harvard Business School invited me to speak about entrepreneurial resilience and the role of failure in innovation. Standing in that prestigious lecture hall, addressing MBA students who were eager to understand how setbacks could be converted into competitive advantages, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from bankruptcy to recognition as a thought leader in sustainable technology. The students' questions were sophisticated and challenging. They wanted to understand the psychological dimensions of recovering from business failure, the strategic decisions that had differentiated Wastewise from EcoWrap, and the market timing factors that had contributed to our success. Their engagement demonstrated how thoroughly the narrative around entrepreneurial failure had evolved. Business schools were now teaching failure as a valuable learning experience rather than a disqualifying setback. Students understood that the most successful entrepreneurs often had multiple ventures behind them, each building capabilities and insights that informed better future decisions. My story had become an example of this iterative approach to innovation and market development. The Harvard presentation was recorded and shared widely through business education networks. Entrepreneur groups invited me to discuss resilience, strategies. Incubator programs asked me to mentor founders who were struggling with their own setbacks and challenges. The platform that Forbes had provided had expanded into broader opportunities to influence how society understood and supported entrepreneurial risk-taking. 6 months later, I found myself back in the same South Austin coffee shop where Jessica had predicted my entrepreneurial doom. This time, I was meeting with a documentary filmmaker who wanted to create a short film about Wastewise's journey, from bankruptcy to industry leadership. The contrast with my previous visit couldn't have been more dramatic. Instead of defending my decision to continue pursuing entrepreneurship, I was explaining how failure had accelerated my learning and improved my strategic thinking. Instead of justifying my unwillingness to accept conventional employment, I was describing how unconventional approaches had created value in ways that traditional consulting never could have achieved. The filmmaker was particularly interested in the role that family skepticism had played in motivating my success. Jessica's prediction had become a catalyst rather than a limitation, providing clarity about what I needed to prove and determination to achieve it. The doubt had been painful, but ultimately productive, forcing deeper reflection and more rigorous preparation than encouragement might have generated. As I sat in that familiar coffee shop, surrounded by the Austin entrepreneurship community that had witnessed both my failure and my comeback, I realized that Jessica's assessment had been wrong, not because she had misjudged my character, but because she had misunderstood the nature of entrepreneurial success. Business building wasn't a talent that people either possessed or lacked. It was a skill set that could be developed through experience, including the hard-won lessons that only failure could provide. The documentary, when it was eventually released, captured this transformation beautifully. It showed the warehouse, where EcoWrap had operated, interviewed former employees who had witnessed both ventures, and documented the technological innovations that had made Wastewise possible. But more importantly, it illustrated how setbacks could become foundations for greater achievements when approached with the right mindset and determination. Wastewise Analytics had become more than a successful company. It had become proof that entrepreneurial failure was often entrepreneurial education in disguise, a necessary step in the development of capabilities that conventional paths could never provide. Jessica's prediction about my inability to recover had been spectacularly wrong, but her skepticism had played a crucial role in motivating the success that proved her wrong. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing algorithm performance data in my cramped incubator office. Michael burst through my door without knocking, his face flushed with excitement and his phone still pressed to his ear. He had just finished a conversation with the CEO of Nutrichain, a national food distribution network with over 300 locations across the Southwest. They were hemorrhaging money on expired inventory and had heard about our success with smaller, regional clients. The opportunity was staggering in its scope and complexity. Nutrichain moved fresh produce, dairy, and prepared foods through a supply chain that spanned 6 states and served everything from corner groceries to major restaurant chains. Their waste management challenges made our previous projects look like academic exercises. They were losing approximately $4 million annually to spoilage, over-ordering, and inefficient distribution patterns. More importantly for WasteWise's future, Nutrichain's parent company was publicly traded and under intense pressure from shareholders to improve their environmental, social, and governance metrics. Reducing food waste wasn't just an operational efficiency issue for them. It was a corporate responsibility imperative that affected their stock valuation and access to sustainable investment funds. The initial meeting took place in Nutrichain's corporate headquarters in Dallas, a gleaming tower that housed the logistical brain of their massive distribution network. Walking into their conference room, surrounded by executives who managed billion-dollar supply chains, I felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that accompanied every major opportunity. This wasn't just another client. This was the kind of enterprise implementation that could establish WasteWise as a serious player in the corporate sustainability market. CEO Patricia Wells was exactly what I expected from someone who had built a food distribution empire from a family trucking business. She was direct, data-driven, and skeptical of technology solutions that promised revolutionary results. Her questions were precise and unforgiving. How could artificial intelligence algorithms account for variables that human operators with decades of experience still struggled to predict? What evidence did we have that our approach would scale across diverse geographic markets and customer segments? I spent 3 hours presenting our methodology, walking through case studies from previous implementations, and demonstrating the machine learning models that powered our waste reduction analytics. The technical discussion was intense, covering everything from data integration challenges to predictive accuracy measures. Patricia's team included operations managers, data scientists, and sustainability officers who challenged every assumption and questioned every projection. The breakthrough moment came when I connected my laptop to their presentation system and ran a live analysis of their historical data. Using 3 years of sales, inventory, and waste disposal records that they had provided under a confidentiality agreement, I showed them patterns in their waste generation that their internal systems had never identified. The algorithm revealed correlations between weather patterns and produce demand, relationships between local events and inventory turnover, and inefficiencies in their distribution routing that were costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Patricia leaned forward as the data visualizations populated on the screen, showing waste hotspots across their network and predicting optimal inventory levels for the upcoming quarter. For the first time in our meeting, she looked genuinely impressed rather than professionally skeptical. The numbers were compelling in ways that theoretical presentations could never be. The contract negotiation took 6 weeks and required legal expertise that stretched beyond anything I had handled during the EcoWrap years. Michael's experience with enterprise sales proved invaluable as we navigated procurement processes, compliance requirements, and performance guarantees that protected Nutrichain while giving WasteWise the resources we needed to deliver results. The implementation timeline was aggressive, requiring a complete integration with Nutrichain's existing inventory management systems within 4 months. I hired 3 additional data scientists and leased expanded office space to accommodate the team growth. The pressure was immense, knowing that failure with a client of Nutrichain's prominence could destroy WasteWise's credibility in the enterprise market. During this period, Jessica invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown, ostensibly to celebrate my business progress, but clearly curious about the sustainability of what she viewed as my latest venture. She had heard through mutual connections that Wastewise was working with major corporate clients, but her tone suggested she remained skeptical about long-term viability. The conversation followed familiar patterns from our relationship. Jessica acknowledged that I was having some success, but questioned whether I was building something genuinely valuable or simply riding a temporary trend in corporate sustainability spending. She pointed out that environmental initiatives were often the first casualties when companies faced budget pressures, suggesting that Wastewise's revenue model might be more fragile than I realized. Her analysis wasn't entirely wrong, which made it particularly frustrating. Sustainability consulting had historically been viewed as a nice-to-have expense rather than an essential business function. Companies supported environmental initiatives when profits were strong but abandoned them quickly during economic downturns. Jessica's legal background gave her insight into how corporate priorities shifted during challenging periods. What she failed to understand was how fundamentally different Wastewise's value proposition was from traditional environmental consulting. We weren't asking companies to spend money on feel-good initiatives that might improve their public image. We were helping them reduce operational costs while achieving environmental goals. The waste reduction we delivered translated directly to improved profit margins, making our services essential rather than optional. I explained this distinction to Jessica, showing her the concrete financial results we had achieved for previous clients. The grocery chain was saving over $200,000 annually while reducing their environmental footprint. Robert's distribution company had improved their margins by 15% while cutting food waste in half. These weren't intangible benefits that depended on stakeholder goodwill. They were measurable improvements to bottom-line performance. Jessica listened politely, but remained unconvinced that these results would translate to sustainable long-term growth for Wastewise. In her view, I was still pursuing high-risk ventures that could collapse as quickly as they had emerged. She reminded me that EcoWrap had also shown early promise before market conditions and competitive pressures had led to its downfall. The comparison stung because it contained elements of truth. EcoWrap had generated enthusiasm and initial sales before structural problems had become apparent. The difference was that Wastewise was built on fundamentally different principles. Informed by everything I had learned from that earlier failure, we focused on measurable outcomes rather than aspirational goals, diversified our client base rather than depending on single relationships, and maintained conservative financial management rather than pursuing aggressive expansion. More importantly, the market environment for environmental technology had evolved dramatically since EcoWrap's bankruptcy. Corporate sustainability was no longer a peripheral concern driven by public relations considerations. Regulatory requirements, investor expectations, and operational costs had made environmental performance a core business imperative that couldn't be ignored or deferred. The lunch ended with Jessica offering what she clearly intended as supportive advice about maintaining realistic expectations and preparing for potential setbacks. Her message was essentially unchanged from our coffee shop conversation 2 years earlier. Entrepreneurship was risky. I had already experienced significant failure, and prudent planning required accepting the possibility that Wastewise might not achieve the success I envisioned. Walking back to my office after that lunch, I felt a familiar surge of determination to prove Jessica's skepticism wrong. Her doubt wasn't malicious, but it represented a broader assumption that entrepreneurial success was largely about luck rather than learning and adaptation. She couldn't conceive that failure might actually improve my capabilities rather than revealing my limitations. The NutriChain implementation became my obsession over the following months. I worked 16-hour days refining algorithms, testing, integration protocols, and ensuring that our system could handle the complexity of their nationwide operations. The technical challenges were extraordinary, requiring machine learning models that could process millions of data points in real time while accounting for regional variations, seasonal patterns, and supply chain disruptions. The pressure intensified. When Patricia Wells announced that Nutri-Chain would be presenting their waste reduction initiatives at the National Food Distribution Conference, with WasteWise's results featured prominently in their sustainability report. The conference attracted industry leaders from across the country and would provide unprecedented visibility for our platform. Success could establish WasteWise as the definitive solution for food waste analytics. Failure would be equally public and damaging. Michael and I spent weeks preparing for the conference presentation, developing visualizations that would demonstrate our impact clearly and compellingly. The data was impressive. Nutri-Chain had reduced their food waste by 42% in the first 6 months of implementation, while improving inventory availability and customer satisfaction. The financial impact exceeded our most optimistic projections, saving them over $3 million annually. The conference presentation was scheduled for the main stage, with an audience of over 800 food industry executives. Standing backstage before my introduction, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years earlier, I had been liquidating EcoWrap's assets and questioning my ability to build a successful business. Now, I was about to present WasteWise's innovations to the leaders of a multi-billion-dollar industry. Patricia's introduction was generous and specific, highlighting the measurable results that WasteWise had delivered and positioning our approach as a model for the entire food distribution sector. Walking onto that stage, facing an audience of potential clients and industry influencers, I felt the same confidence that had sustained me through the darkest periods of bankruptcy and family criticism. The presentation went flawlessly. The Yabia audience was engaged and responsive, asking sophisticated questions about scalability, integration challenges, and competitive differentiation. Several executives approached me afterward to discuss potential implementations for their own companies. The validation was immediate and tangible, confirming that WasteWise had developed solutions that the market desperately needed. The conference generated more business opportunities than we could immediately handle. Food service companies, retail chains, and manufacturing firms reached out about potential partnerships. Trade publications requested interviews about our artificial intelligence approach to waste management. Investment firms inquired about funding rounds that could accelerate our growth. Most significantly, the conference established WasteWise's reputation as an innovative leader in environmental technology, rather than just another sustainability consulting firm. Industry analysts began tracking our company as a representative example of how artificial intelligence was transforming traditional business functions. The narrative had shifted from experimental startup to proven market leader. The momentum continued building over the following months. We signed contracts with 5 additional enterprise clients, each implementation more complex and valuable than the previous ones. Our team grew to 15 employees, including data scientists poached from major technology companies and operations specialists with deep industry experience. The cramped incubator office was replaced by a proper headquarters in Austin's emerging technology district. Media attention followed business success in ways that I had never experienced during the EcoWrap years. Environmental magazines featured WasteWise as an example of practical sustainability solutions. Technology publications highlighted our artificial intelligence innovations. Business journals profiled our rapid growth and market expansion. Each piece of coverage reinforced the transformation in how environmental technology was perceived by mainstream business media. WasteWise wasn't portrayed as an idealistic startup pursuing feel-good objectives. We were recognized as a legitimate technology company solving real operational challenges for major corporations. The distinction mattered enormously for our credibility with potential clients and investors. The personal transformation was equally significant. I was invited to speak at business conferences, serve on advisory boards for other environmental technology companies, and mentor entrepreneurs who were developing their own sustainability solutions. The platform provided opportunities to influence how the industry understood and addressed waste management challenges. Jessica's response to this success was increasingly awkward and strained. She would congratulate me on specific achievements, but seemed unable to acknowledge that her fundamental assessment of my entrepreneurial capabilities had been wrong. Our family dinners became exercises in diplomatic conversation, with everyone carefully avoiding references to her earlier predictions about my business prospects. The tension came to a head during a family celebration for our parents' restaurant anniversary. Jessica had organized the event at an expensive Austin venue, inviting extended family and longtime customers to celebrate Sabor Auténtico's success. The gathering was intended to honor our parents' achievement, but it became an uncomfortable showcase of the different paths their daughters had taken. Throughout the evening, guests approached me to discuss WasteWise's recent media coverage and ask about our environmental impact. Several attendees were business owners who had read about our waste reduction results and wanted to understand how similar solutions might benefit their operations. The conversations were flattering, but also highlighted how dramatically my public profile had changed. Jessica watched these interactions with visible discomfort, clearly struggling to reconcile the successful entrepreneur receiving recognition with her long-held assumptions about my business judgment. Her legal career, while financially rewarding, hadn't generated the kind of public attention or industry influence that WasteWise was attracting. The evening's most awkward moment came when a family friend mentioned reading about WasteWise in a recent Austin Business Journal article and asked Jessica if she was proud of her sister's environmental work. Jessica's response was polite, but notably restrained, acknowledging my success while avoiding any admission that she had previously discouraged my entrepreneurial pursuits. Later that week, I received an email from Emma Rodriguez, the Forbes journalist who had been tracking emerging companies in the sustainability sector. She had followed WasteWise's progress since the food distribution conference and was interested in featuring our story in a major article about artificial intelligence, applications in environmental technology. The initial conversation with Emma was extensive and probing. She wanted to understand not just what WasteWise had achieved, but how we had overcome the challenges that typically prevented environmental technology companies from scaling successfully. Her questions about my previous business experience led naturally to discussions about EcoWrap's failure and the lessons that had informed WasteWise's different approach. Emma was particularly interested in the role that setbacks had played in my entrepreneurial development. She was working on a broader story about resilience in business building, exploring how failure often provided education that success could never deliver. WasteWise represented an ideal case study for this theme, demonstrating how bankruptcy could become a foundation for greater achievement. The interview process extended over several weeks, with Emma conducting background research on our clients, competitors, and market position. She spoke with Patricia Wells about NutriChain's results, interviewed Michael about our technology development, and reviewed financial documents that demonstrated our growth trajectory. The thoroughness was impressive and slightly intimidating. 3 months later, Emma called with news that would change everything again. Forbes had decided to feature WasteWise Analytics in a cover story about the next generation of environmental technology companies. The article would highlight how artificial intelligence was revolutionizing sustainability efforts and position WasteWise as a leader in this emerging market segment. The cover photo shoot was scheduled for the following week at Austin's newest luxury hotel, with the city skyline providing a backdrop that symbolized innovation and growth. Standing on that rooftop terrace, wearing a professional blazer that projected the authority and confidence that Forbes readers expected, I tried to process how completely my circumstances had transformed. Looking out over Austin's expanding downtown, I could see the building where Jessica's law firm operated and the neighborhood where EcoWrap's warehouse had been located. The geographic proximity made the personal distance even more striking. In less than 3 years, I had moved from bankruptcy and family skepticism to national recognition as an innovative business leader. The Forbes article, when it was published, exceeded every expectation I had harbored about mainstream media coverage. The story positioned WasteWise as representative of a new wave of environmental technology companies that were delivering measurable results rather than aspirational commitments. Emma's writing captured both the technical sophistication of our approach and the practical impact of our implementations. More importantly, the article told the broader story of how business failure could accelerate learning and improve subsequent ventures. Emma had interviewed several other entrepreneurs who had built successful companies after experiencing significant setbacks, illustrating that resilience and adaptation were often more valuable than avoiding risk entirely. The response to the Forbes cover was immediate and overwhelming. Our website crashed from traffic volume within hours of the magazine hitting newsstands. The phone rang constantly with calls from potential clients, investors, speaking bureaus, and media outlets requesting follow-up interviews. WasteWise had achieved the kind of visibility that most companies spend years trying to develop. Jessica's reaction to the Forbes cover was telling in its restraint. She sent a brief congratulatory text message, but avoided any substantive discussion of what the recognition meant for my career or our family dynamics. Her silence spoke volumes about her difficulty accepting how thoroughly her assessment of my entrepreneurial potential had been disproven. The Forbes article opened doors that had previously seemed impossible to access. Major corporations that had never responded to our outreach suddenly wanted to discuss potential partnerships. Investment firms that specialized in environmental technology began conducting due diligence for potential funding rounds. Speaking opportunities emerged at conferences that attracted global business leaders. Within 2 months of the Forbes publication, WasteWise had received acquisition inquiries from 3 major software companies and investment proposals from several prominent venture capital firms. The valuations being discussed exceeded anything I had imagined during the company's early development phases. Jessica's prediction that I would never recover from EcoWrap's bankruptcy was being contradicted in the most public and definitive way possible. The morning after the Forbes cover story hit newsstands, I arrived at WasteWise headquarters to find a line of reporters waiting outside our building. News vans from 3 local television stations were parked along the street, and my assistant informed me that she had fielded over 60 phone calls before 9 o'clock. The transformation from regional startup to national news story had happened literally overnight. The first major opportunity came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Stevens, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Meridian Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in North America, had read the Forbes article during her flight from Chicago to Austin. Meridian operated over 200 facilities across 15 countries and was under intense pressure from both regulators and shareholders to reduce their environmental footprint. Amanda's call came directly to my personal line, bypassing our normal sales process entirely. She explained that Meridian's board had mandated a 50% reduction in manufacturing waste within 18 months, a target that seemed impossible using conventional approaches. The Forbes article had convinced her that artificial intelligence might provide solutions that traditional consulting could never deliver. The scale of Meridian's challenge was breathtaking. Their facilities generated everything from chemical byproducts to packaging waste, electronic components to food processing residuals. Each location operated under different regulatory frameworks, served distinct customer segments, and faced unique logistical constraints. Creating a unified waste reduction strategy across such diversity would require technological capabilities that pushed far beyond anything WasteWise had previously attempted. Michael and I flew to Meridian's Chicago headquarters the following week for what Amanda described as an exploratory meeting, but felt more like an audition for the most significant contract in our company's history. The corporate campus sprawled across several city blocks, a monument to industrial complexity that housed the administrative brain of a global manufacturing empire. The conference room where we presented was filled with executives whose decisions affected millions of jobs and billions of dollars in revenue. Chief Operating Officer Marcus Chen had built his career optimizing supply chains and viewed waste reduction as an engineering problem that required systematic solutions. Chief Financial Officer Rebecca Walsh wanted concrete evidence that our approach would deliver measurable returns on investment within specific timeframes. The presentation I delivered that morning represented everything WasteWise had learned. From 3 years of algorithm development and client implementations, I walked through detailed case studies showing how machine learning could identify waste reduction opportunities that human analysis missed, demonstrated predictive models that had saved clients millions of dollars, and outlined integration strategies that could scale across Meridian's diverse operations. The technical discussion lasted 4 hours and covered every aspect of our methodology. Marcus questioned how our algorithms would adapt to manufacturing processes that varied dramatically across different product lines. Rebecca demanded projections showing return on investment timelines and risk mitigation strategies. Amanda wanted assurance that our environmental impact measurements would satisfy the most rigorous sustainability reporting requirements. The far breakthrough moment came when I connected our demonstration system to historical data from 3 of Meridian's facilities and ran live analytics showing waste patterns that their internal systems had never identified. The algorithm revealed correlations between production scheduling and material waste, relationships between maintenance cycles and energy consumption, and inefficiencies in supply chain coordination that were costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars monthly. Marcus leaned forward as the visualizations populated on the main screen, showing waste hotspots across their network and predicting optimal resource allocation for the upcoming quarter. For the first time in our presentation, the room felt energized rather than skeptical. The numbers were compelling in ways that theoretical frameworks could never achieve. The contract negotiation stretched over 8 weeks and required legal expertise that challenged every aspect of WasteWise's operational capabilities. Meridian's procurement process involved compliance reviews, security audits, and performance guarantees that protected them while ensuring we had resources necessary to deliver unprecedented results across their global network. The implementation timeline was extraordinarily aggressive, requiring integration with manufacturing execution systems, supply chain management platforms, and environmental monitoring networks across 47 facilities within 6 months. I authorized the hiring of 12 additional engineers and data scientists, doubled our server capacity, and established partnerships with industrial automation companies that could provide specialized expertise. The pressure was unlike anything I had experienced during previous implementations. Meridian's success would establish WasteWise as the definitive solution for enterprise-scale waste reduction. Failure would destroy our credibility in the global manufacturing market and potentially bankrupt the company. Every decision carried enormous consequences for our team, our clients, and my personal reputation. During this intense period, I received an invitation that crystallized how dramatically my professional standing had evolved. The World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos had invited me to participate in a panel discussion about artificial intelligence applications in sustainability. The invitation placed me alongside executives from Fortune 100 companies, government officials from major economies, and academic leaders from prestigious universities. The Davos invitation represented validation that extended far beyond WasteWise's specific achievements. I was being recognized as a thought leader whose insights could influence global policy discussions about technology and environmental protection. The transformation from bankruptcy to international recognition felt surreal and slightly overwhelming. Jessica's response to the Davos invitation was particularly revealing. She called me the evening after the announcement appeared in Austin Business Journal, ostensibly to congratulate me, but clearly struggling to process how far my career had progressed beyond her predictions. Her tone carried a mixture of genuine surprise and grudging respect that felt different from our previous conversations. For the first time since EcoWrap's bankruptcy, Jessica seemed to acknowledge that my entrepreneurial path might be fundamentally different from the high-risk venture she had assumed it represented. The World Economic Forum didn't invite failed business owners or unstable dreamers to address global leaders about technology strategy. My participation implied recognition from international experts who understood market dynamics and competitive positioning. The conversation revealed how much Jessica's perspective had been shaped by limited exposure to successful entrepreneurship. Her legal career brought her into contact with established corporations and conventional business models, but rarely with innovative companies that were creating new market categories. She had mistaken the inherent uncertainty of innovation for evidence of poor judgment. The Davos panel discussion took place in January, with delegates from 60 countries participating in sessions that would influence policy decisions affecting billions of people. Standing on that stage, addressing an audience that included heads of state and multinational corporation leaders, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from a bankrupt Austin entrepreneur to a recognized expert in global sustainability technology. The panel focused on how artificial intelligence could accelerate achievement of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly those related to responsible consumption and waste reduction. My presentation highlighted WasteWise's work with multinational clients and demonstrated how machine learning algorithms could optimize resource utilization across diverse cultural and regulatory environments. The audience response was extraordinary. Government officials inquired about adapting our approach for national waste reduction initiatives. Corporate executives asked about licensing our technology for internal sustainability programs. Academic researchers wanted to collaborate on studies measuring the broader economic impact of AI-driven environmental solutions. Most significantly, the panel generated media coverage that positioned WasteWise as representative of a new generation of technology companies addressing global environmental challenges. International business publications featured articles about our growth trajectory and market impact. Environmental organizations highlighted our measurable results as evidence that private sector innovation could deliver meaningful sustainability improvements. The Davos exposure catalyzed business opportunities that exceeded our capacity to evaluate properly. Governments from emerging economies wanted to discuss national waste management partnerships. Multinational consulting firms proposed strategic alliances that could expand our reach into new geographic markets. Investment banks inquired about initial public offering timelines and valuation methodologies. Michael and I spent the months following Davos managing growth that felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. We had achieved the kind of international recognition that most entrepreneurs spend decades pursuing, but the opportunities emerging required capabilities and resources that stretched far beyond our current infrastructure. The Meridian implementation reached its first major milestone 3 months after Davos, with preliminary results exceeding even our most optimistic projections. Manufacturing waste across their pilot facilities had decreased by 38%, while production efficiency improved by 12%. The financial impact was staggering, saving Meridian over $8 million in the first quarter alone. Marcus Chen's presentation of these results to Meridian's board of directors became a case study in how artificial intelligence could transform traditional manufacturing operations. The board authorized expansion of WasteWise's system across all Meridian facilities worldwide, a contract valued at over $40 million that would establish us as the largest waste analytics provider in the global manufacturing sector. The Meridian success generated cascading effects throughout the industrial technology market. Competing manufacturing companies couldn't ignore the competitive advantages that waste reduction was providing to Meridian's operations. Within 6 months, we had received implementation requests from 7 additional Fortune 500 manufacturers, each seeking similar operational improvements and environmental performance gains. The scale of opportunity required fundamental changes to WasteWise's organizational structure and strategic focus. We established partnerships with major consulting firms that could provide implementation support across multiple client engagements simultaneously. We opened offices in New York, London, and Singapore to support global client relationships. We hired industry veterans who understood the complexity of multinational corporate operations. The transformation from startup to global technology company happened faster than any strategic plan could have anticipated. Revenue growth exceeded 300% annually for 2 consecutive years. Our team expanded to over 100 employees across 4 countries. Industry analysts began tracking WasteWise as a representative example of how artificial intelligence was disrupting traditional business functions. Media attention intensified alongside business growth, with coverage that positioned WasteWise as a symbol of American innovation in environmental technology. The narrative resonated particularly strongly during a period when concerns about climate change and resource scarcity dominated global political discussions. We represented proof that private sector innovation could address environmental challenges while generating substantial economic value. The personal impact of this recognition was profound and occasionally overwhelming. Speaking invitations arrived from business schools, industry conferences, and government organizations around the world. Advisory board positions were offered by environmental nonprofits, technology companies, and investment firms. Media interviews became a regular part of my schedule, with journalists seeking insights about entrepreneurship, technology development, and sustainability strategy. Jessica's evolution during this period was particularly interesting to observe. She had gradually shifted from skepticism about WasteWise's viability to professional curiosity about our business model and market positioning. Her legal background provided useful perspective on intellectual property protection, regulatory compliance, and international expansion strategies that informed several important strategic decisions. The relationship between us had fundamentally changed from the dynamic that had existed during and immediately after EcoWrap's bankruptcy. Jessica was no longer the successful professional offering guidance to her struggling entrepreneur sister. We had become peers with complementary expertise, collaborating on legal and business challenges that affected WasteWise's continued growth. The transformation culminated when Harvard Business School invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual entrepreneurship conference. The invitation represented recognition from the most prestigious business education institution in the world, acknowledging WasteWise's achievements and my personal journey from bankruptcy to international business leadership. Standing before an audience of MBA students, successful entrepreneurs, and venture capital investors, I delivered a presentation about resilience, innovation, and the role of failure in entrepreneurial development. The core message focused on how setbacks could accelerate learning and improve strategic decision-making when approached with the right mindset and determination. The Harvard presentation was recorded and distributed through business education networks worldwide, becoming required viewing for entrepreneurship courses at dozens of universities. The platform provided opportunities to influence how future business leaders understood risk, failure, and the iterative process of building successful companies. Feedback from students was particularly gratifying, with many expressing appreciation for honest discussion about entrepreneurial challenges and the learning process that failure could provide. Several students mentioned that the presentation had changed their perspective on career risk-taking and encouraged them to pursue innovative solutions to complex problems. The Harvard recognition generated additional speaking opportunities at Stanford, Wharton, and other leading business schools. Each presentation refined my understanding of how to communicate entrepreneurial lessons effectively and reinforced the broader value of sharing honest accounts of business-building challenges and opportunities. 6 months after the Harvard keynote, Fortune magazine featured WasteWise in their annual list of companies to watch, highlighting our rapid growth and market impact alongside other emerging technology leaders. The recognition placed us in the company of artificial intelligence firms, biotechnology companies, and renewable energy developers that were reshaping entire industries. The Fortune feature coincided with announcement of our Series B funding round, which raised $65 million from prominent venture capital firms and strategic investors. The valuation exceeded $200 million, reflecting market confidence in our technology platform and growth trajectory. Jessica attended the funding announcement reception, finally seeming genuinely proud of what WasteWise had achieved. The funding provided resources to accelerate international expansion and develop new artificial intelligence capabilities that would extend our platform beyond waste management into broader sustainability optimization. We established research, partnerships with leading universities, hired world-class data scientists from major technology companies, and began developing solutions for water usage, energy consumption, and carbon footprint reduction. The strategic vision emerging from this expansion positioned WasteWise as the definitive platform for AI-driven corporate sustainability, addressing the full spectrum of environmental challenges that multinational companies faced. The market opportunity was enormous, with corporate sustainability spending projected to exceed $500 billion annually within the next decade. As I reflected on the journey from EcoWrap's bankruptcy to WasteWise's international recognition, the role that Jessica's initial skepticism had played became increasingly clear. Her doubt had forced deeper analysis of market opportunities, more rigorous business planning, and stronger determination to prove that entrepreneurial failure could be transformed into foundation for greater success. The prediction that I would never recover from business bankruptcy had been more than simply wrong. It had been catalytic in motivating achievements that conventional encouragement might never have generated. Sometimes the most valuable gift that family members can provide is honest skepticism that forces entrepreneurs to develop capabilities they didn't know they possessed. The call that would define everything came on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 2 years after the Forbes cover story had transformed WasteWise from a promising startup into a recognized industry leader. I was reviewing quarterly performance metrics in our expanded Austin headquarters when my assistant informed me that Dr. Elena Vasquez from the United Nations Environment Program was holding on line 1. Dr. Vasquez had been following WasteWise's growth trajectory since our Davos presentation and was calling with an extraordinary proposition. The UN was launching a global initiative to reduce industrial waste by 30% within 5 years, and they wanted WasteWise to serve as the primary technology partner for implementations across developing economies. The scope was staggering: over 40 countries, thousands of manufacturing facilities, and potential environmental impact that could affect hundreds of millions of people. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours as Dr. Vasquez outlined the complexity and urgency of global waste challenges. Developing economies were experiencing rapid industrialization without corresponding investments in waste management infrastructure. Manufacturing companies in these regions often lacked resources to implement sophisticated environmental controls, leading to pollution patterns that threatened both public health and economic sustainability. WasteWise's artificial intelligence platform represented exactly the kind of scalable solution that could address these challenges without requiring massive capital investments from governments or individual companies. Our algorithms could optimize existing operations rather than demanding wholesale replacement of manufacturing equipment, making environmental improvements accessible to companies that couldn't afford traditional consulting approaches. The UN partnership would involve training local engineers in dozens of countries, adapting our platform for diverse regulatory frameworks, and measuring environmental impact across dramatically different industrial contexts. Success would establish WasteWise as the global standard for AI-driven sustainability solutions. Failure would be equally visible on the international stage. Michael and I spent the following month conducting due diligence on the UN opportunity, traveling to facilities in Mexico, Brazil, Thailand, and South Africa to understand implementation challenges firsthand. The complexity was extraordinary, with each region presenting unique combinations of technological constraints, regulatory requirements, and cultural considerations that would require completely customized approaches. The manufacturing facility we visited outside Bangkok exemplified both the opportunity and the challenge. The plant employed over 3,000 workers producing automotive components for export markets, but their waste management systems hadn't been updated since the 1990s. Chemical byproducts were being disposed of inefficiently, packaging materials were accumulating faster than recycling capacity could handle, and energy consumption patterns were generating unnecessary carbon emissions. Walking through that facility with the plant manager, a thoughtful engineer named Somchai Nakamura, I realized that WasteWise's algorithms could reduce their environmental footprint by 40% while improving operational efficiency and reducing costs. The technology that had been developed for Fortune 500 companies in developed economies could deliver even greater impact in settings where baseline waste management practices were less sophisticated. The human dimension of the opportunity was equally compelling. Somchai explained how environmental regulations were tightening rapidly as Thailand pursued membership in various international trade agreements. But local companies lacked resources to hire expensive consulting firms or purchase advanced monitoring equipment. WasteWise's platform could provide sophisticated analytics capabilities at costs that made environmental compliance accessible rather than prohibitive. Similar patterns emerged at every facility we visited during our research phase. Manufacturing. Companies across developing economies were caught between increasing environmental expectations and limited technical resources. Traditional consulting approaches were too expensive and too slow to address the scale of change required, but artificial intelligence solutions could democratize access to optimization capabilities that had previously been available only to multinational corporations. The business case for the UN partnership was compelling beyond the immediate revenue opportunity. Success would establish WasteWise as the definitive platform for global sustainability initiatives, opening markets that encompassed billions of people and trillions of dollars in economic activity. More importantly, the environmental impact would extend far beyond corporate sustainability reporting to address fundamental challenges affecting climate change, public health, and economic development. The contract negotiation with the UN involved complexity that exceeded anything we had previously encountered. The agreement required compliance with international development standards, coordination with government agencies across multiple continents, and performance metrics that would be scrutinized by environmental organizations, academic researchers, and political leaders worldwide. 6 months after Dr. Vasquez's initial call, we signed a partnership agreement that committed WasteWise to implementing waste reduction solutions across manufacturing facilities in 43 countries over a 3-year period. The contract value exceeded $100 million, but the strategic importance extended far beyond financial considerations. The announcement of the UN partnership generated global media coverage that positioned WasteWise as representative of how American technology innovation could address international development challenges. Environmental publications highlighted the potential impact on global carbon emissions and pollution reduction. Business magazines focused on the market opportunities emerging from sustainable development initiatives. Most significantly for my personal journey, the UN partnership represented vindication that extended far beyond proving Jessica's skepticism wrong. The collaboration would affect environmental outcomes for hundreds of millions of people, demonstrating that entrepreneurial innovation could address challenges that traditional approaches had failed to solve effectively. Jessica's response to the UN announcement was notably different from her reactions to previous WasteWise milestones. Instead of polite congratulations tinged with lingering skepticism, she called to express genuine admiration for what the partnership represented. Her legal background helped her understand the complexity of international agreements and the significance of being selected as a primary technology partner for global development initiatives. For the first time since EcoWrap's bankruptcy, Jessica acknowledged that she had fundamentally misjudged my entrepreneurial capabilities and the potential of technology-driven environmental solutions. The conversation felt like closure to a chapter that had begun with her dismissive assessment of my recovery prospects and evolved through grudging recognition to genuine respect for what WasteWise had achieved. The UN implementation began with pilot projects in 5 countries, each presenting unique challenges that required innovative adaptations of our core platform. The facility in Lagos, Nigeria, was processing agricultural products for export, but generating enormous amounts of organic waste that could be converted into renewable energy with proper optimization. The manufacturing plant in Guatemala was producing textiles for international fashion brands, but lacked systems to manage chemical dyeing byproducts effectively. Each pilot required collaboration with local engineers, government officials, and environmental organizations that brought perspectives and expertise our team had never encountered. The cultural learning curve was steep, but the diversity of viewpoints improved our algorithms and expanded our understanding of how artificial intelligence could be adapted for different technological and regulatory contexts. The results from the initial implementations exceeded our most optimistic projections. The Lagos facility reduced organic waste by 52%, while generating renewable energy that offset 30% of their electricity costs. The Guatemala plant decreased chemical waste by 45%, while improving dyeing efficiency and reducing water consumption. Similar patterns emerged across all 5 pilot locations. More importantly, the success generated enthusiasm from facility managers and workers who had often viewed environmental compliance as an additional burden rather than an opportunity for operational improvement. Seeing concrete benefits from waste reduction motivated broader engagement with sustainability initiatives and demonstrated that environmental responsibility could align with economic interests. The pilot success prompted accelerated rollout across additional countries and facility types. Manufacturing plants, food processing centers, and agricultural operations began requesting implementations ahead of the original timeline. Government agencies started integrating WasteWise's platform into national environmental monitoring systems. International development organizations began recommending our approach for other sustainability initiatives. The scale of impact was becoming measurable in ways that extended far beyond individual client success stories. Our platform was affecting carbon emissions, water quality, and waste disposal patterns across entire regions. Environmental monitoring organizations began incorporating WasteWise implementations into their assessment of global sustainability. Progress. During this period of explosive international growth, I received an invitation that crystallized how completely my professional standing had evolved since the bankruptcy years. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy asked me to serve on a presidential advisory committee focused on artificial intelligence applications for climate change mitigation. The appointment required Senate confirmation and positioned me alongside Nobel Prize winners, Fortune 500 CEOs, and internationally recognized experts in environmental science. The advisory committee role involved quarterly meetings with senior administration officials, participation in policy development processes, and testimony before congressional committees about technology strategy and environmental priorities. The platform provided opportunities to influence government investments in artificial intelligence research, regulatory frameworks for environmental technology, and international cooperation agreements on climate change initiatives. Standing in the Roosevelt Room of the White House during my first committee meeting, surrounded by individuals whose expertise shaped national policy decisions, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from Austin startup founder to presidential advisor. The transformation seemed almost impossible to comprehend, even as I was experiencing it directly. The committee's work focused on identifying artificial intelligence applications that could accelerate progress toward national climate goals while maintaining economic competitiveness in global technology markets. WasteWise's international implementations provided real-world evidence that AI-driven environmental solutions could deliver measurable results at the scale required for meaningful climate impact. My testimony before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee became a defining moment in articulating how private sector innovation could address public policy challenges. The senators' questions were sophisticated and challenging, covering everything from competitive implications of government technology investments to diplomatic considerations affecting international development partnerships. The hearing was broadcast live and generated extensive media coverage that positioned WasteWise as an example of American entrepreneurship addressing global challenges through technological innovation. Environmental organizations highlighted our measured results as evidence that private sector solutions could complement government regulatory approaches. Business publications focused on the economic opportunities emerging from sustainable development initiatives. Most personally satisfying was coverage that described my journey from bankruptcy to presidential advisory positions as representative of entrepreneurial resilience and the value of learning from failure. The narrative had evolved from cautionary tale about business risks to inspiring example of how setbacks could accelerate innovation and expand impact beyond anything conventional success might have achieved. The White House appointment generated cascading opportunities that extended WasteWise's influence far beyond our direct client relationships. International development agencies began requesting our expertise for environmental initiatives across multiple continents. Academic institutions offered research partnerships that could advance artificial intelligence applications for sustainability challenges. Technology companies proposed strategic alliances that could integrate our platform with broader environmental monitoring systems. The most significant opportunity emerged from an unexpected source. Dr. James Morrison, the newly appointed Director General of the World Health Organization, had been following WasteWise's work on industrial waste reduction and its connections to public health outcomes in developing economies. He called with a proposition that would expand our focus beyond manufacturing efficiency to address healthcare waste management challenges affecting billions of people worldwide. Healthcare waste presented unique challenges that required different analytical approaches from industrial manufacturing. Medical facilities generated materials that required specialized disposal procedures, but many hospitals in developing countries lacked resources to implement proper waste management protocols. Improper disposal of medical waste created public health risks that extended far beyond facility boundaries. Dr. Morrison explained that WHO had identified healthcare waste management as a critical component of global health security, particularly in the context of pandemic preparedness and response. The COVID-19 pandemic had demonstrated how quickly medical waste volumes could overwhelm existing disposal systems, creating environmental contamination and public health emergencies. WasteWise's artificial intelligence platform could optimize healthcare waste management by predicting disposal volumes, identifying efficiency opportunities, and ensuring compliance with safety protocols. The application would require developing new algorithms specifically designed for medical contexts, but the underlying analytical capabilities translated directly from our industrial experience. The WHO partnership discussions extended over 4 months and involved collaboration with medical professionals, public health experts, and healthcare administrators from dozens of countries. The complexity was extraordinary, requiring understanding of medical protocols, regulatory frameworks, and cultural considerations that affected healthcare delivery in dramatically different contexts. The partnership agreement, when finally signed, committed WasteWise to implementing healthcare waste management solutions across medical facilities in 60 countries over a 5-year period. The contract represented our largest single engagement, but more importantly, it positioned us as the definitive platform for AI-driven waste optimization across multiple sectors affecting billions of people. The announcement of the WHO partnership generated global media coverage that transcended business and technology publications to reach mainstream news outlets, medical journals, and public health organizations. The narrative focused on how artificial intelligence innovation could address fundamental challenges affecting human health and environmental protection simultaneously. Jessica's response to the WHO announcement was profoundly different from any of our previous conversations about WasteWise's achievements. She called the evening after the news broke, and for the first time since EcoWrap's bankruptcy, she seemed genuinely amazed by what I had accomplished. Her voice carried a combination of admiration, disbelief, and something approaching awe that our relationship had never encompassed. The conversation lasted over an hour as Jessica asked detailed questions about the healthcare applications we were developing, the complexity of WHO's global operations, and the potential impact on public health outcomes worldwide. Her legal expertise helped her understand the significance of being selected as a primary technology partner for international health initiatives. Most importantly, Jessica explicitly acknowledged that her assessment of my entrepreneurial recovery prospects had been not just wrong, but spectacularly, fundamentally mistaken. She admitted that her legal training had prepared her to analyze existing frameworks and precedents, but not to recognize emerging opportunities or evaluate innovative approaches to complex problems. The conversation felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with her devastating prediction that I would never recover from business bankruptcy. The WHO partnership represented achievement that extended far beyond financial success or professional recognition to encompass impact on global health and environmental protection that could affect hundreds of millions of people. The healthcare. Waste management implementations began with pilot projects in 8 countries, each presenting unique challenges that required innovative adaptations of our analytical capabilities. The hospital in Mumbai was struggling to manage disposal volumes that had tripled during recent disease outbreaks. The medical center in São Paulo needed optimization systems that could handle complex regulatory requirements while maintaining strict safety protocols. Each healthcare implementation required collaboration with medical professionals who brought clinical expertise that our engineering team had never encountered. The learning curve was steep, but the diversity of perspectives improved our algorithms and expanded our understanding of how artificial intelligence could be adapted for life-critical applications, where failure meant direct risk to patient safety and public health. The results from healthcare pilots were even more dramatic than our industrial implementations. The Mumbai hospital reduced medical waste disposal costs by 60%, while improving safety compliance and reducing environmental contamination. The São Paulo facility decreased waste volumes by 48%, while streamlining disposal procedures and enhancing infection control protocols. More significantly, the healthcare success generated enthusiasm from medical professionals who had often viewed waste management as a peripheral concern rather than a core component of patient care quality. Demonstrating connections between waste optimization and clinical outcomes motivated broader engagement with environmental initiatives throughout the healthcare sector. The success across both industrial and healthcare sectors prompted expansion into additional areas where waste optimization could deliver measurable impact. Educational institutions began requesting implementations that could reduce operational costs while teaching sustainability principles. Government agencies started integrating our platform into municipal waste management systems. Even military organizations explored applications for optimizing resource consumption in field operations. The breadth of applications was transforming. WasteWise from a specialized environmental technology company into a comprehensive platform for AI-driven resource optimization across virtually every sector of the global economy. The market opportunity was enormous, with waste management representing trillions of dollars in annual economic activity worldwide. Recognition of this transformation came when Time magazine selected me for their annual list of 100 most influential people, highlighting WasteWise's global impact and positioning me alongside heads of state, scientific researchers, and cultural leaders who were shaping international discussions about technology and environmental protection. The Time recognition generated media coverage that extended far beyond business publications to reach general interest audiences worldwide. Profile articles appeared in dozens of languages, describing WasteWise's evolution from Austin startup to global platform affecting environmental outcomes for hundreds of millions of people. Most gratifying was coverage that focused on the journey from bankruptcy to international influence, describing how entrepreneurial failure had accelerated learning and motivated innovations that conventional success might never have generated. The narrative had become inspiring rather than cautionary, demonstrating that setbacks could be transformed into foundations for achievement that exceeded anything originally envisioned. The Time recognition coincided with completion of our series, C funding round, which raised $250 million from international investors and valued WasteWise at over $3 billion. The valuation reflected market confidence in our platform's potential to address sustainability challenges across multiple sectors and geographic regions. Jessica attended the funding announcement reception in Austin, bringing our parents and extended family to celebrate what had become not just a business milestone, but a validation of entrepreneurial persistence and the value of learning from failure. Her presence felt like symbolic closure to the skepticism that had motivated so much of WasteWise's early development. The funding provided resources to accelerate development of new artificial intelligence capabilities that would extend our platform beyond waste optimization to address comprehensive sustainability challenges, including energy consumption, water usage, carbon emissions, and supply chain efficiency. The strategic vision positioned WasteWise as the definitive platform for AI-driven environmental solutions across the global economy. 6 months after the Series C announcement, WasteWise received acquisition inquiries from 3 of the world's largest technology companies, each offering valuations that exceeded $5 billion. The interest reflected recognition that environmental technology represented one of the fastest-growing sectors in the global economy, with sustainability requirements becoming essential rather than optional for virtually every industry. Michael and I spent months evaluating acquisition proposals and strategic partnership opportunities, but ultimately decided that WasteWise's mission required continued independence to maximize global impact. The platform we had built was addressing challenges that affected billions of people, and maintaining control over strategic direction seemed essential for achieving the environmental outcomes that had motivated our work from the beginning. The decision to remain independent was validated when the Nobel Committee announced that WasteWise's work on global waste reduction had been recognized as a significant contribution to environmental protection and sustainable development. While the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences went to the broader field of environmental economics, WasteWise was specifically cited as an example of how artificial intelligence innovation could address sustainability challenges at the scale required for meaningful climate impact. The Nobel recognition represented the ultimate vindication of the journey from bankruptcy to global influence, demonstrating that entrepreneurial innovation could address fundamental challenges affecting human welfare and environmental protection. Jessica called immediately after the announcement, her voice filled with emotion as she reflected on how completely her initial assessment had been disproven. Standing in our Austin headquarters on the day of the Nobel announcement, surrounded by team members who had contributed to WasteWise's evolution from desperate startup to internationally recognized platform, I thought about the path that had brought us to this moment. EcoWrap's bankruptcy had been devastating, but it had also provided education that conventional success could never have delivered. Jessica's skepticism about my recovery prospects had been painful, but ultimately catalytic, motivating determination to prove that entrepreneurial failure could become foundation for greater achievement. Her doubt had forced deeper analysis, more rigorous planning, and stronger commitment to building something that could survive challenges and deliver meaningful impact. The transformation from bankrupt entrepreneur to Nobel-recognized innovator seemed almost impossible to comprehend, but it illustrated fundamental truths about resilience, learning, and the iterative nature of innovation. Failure wasn't evidence of inadequacy. It was often essential education for entrepreneurs who were attempting to solve complex problems through unconventional approaches. WasteWise's success had exceeded every projection and surpassed every goal that I had established during the darkest periods following EcoWrap's collapse. But more importantly, the platform was affecting environmental outcomes for hundreds of millions of people, demonstrating that private sector innovation could address public challenges when guided by mission-driven leadership and supported by appropriate technological capabilities. The Nobel recognition generated opportunities to influence global policy discussions about artificial intelligence, environmental protection, and sustainable development. Speaking invitations arrived from the United Nations General Assembly, the World Economic Forum, and the G20 Summit. Academic institutions offered endowed chairs that would allow continued research into AI applications for sustainability challenges. Each opportunity reinforced how completely the narrative had evolved from Jessica's initial prediction about my inability to recover from business bankruptcy. The Forbes cover story that had seemed like the ultimate vindication now appeared as Just one milestone in a journey that had extended far beyond anything either of us could have imagined. The most meaningful recognition came from environmental organizations that measured WasteWise's impact in terms of carbon emissions reduced, pollution prevented, and resources conserved across our global implementations. The numbers were staggering. Over 2 million tons of waste diverted from landfills, 500,000 tons of carbon emissions prevented, and billions of gallons of water saved through optimized industrial processes. These environmental outcomes represented the real measure of success, extending far beyond financial metrics or professional recognition to encompass measurable improvements in global sustainability. The platform that had begun as an attempt to rebuild after bankruptcy had evolved into a tool affecting environmental protection for current and future generations. As I prepared for my address to the United Nations General Assembly about artificial intelligence applications for sustainable development, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from the coffee shop, where Jessica had predicted my entrepreneurial doom, to the most prestigious international forum for discussing global challenges. The speech I would deliver to delegates from 193 countries would highlight how technological innovation could address environmental challenges when guided by mission-driven leadership and supported by international cooperation. WasteWise's global implementations would serve as evidence that private sector solutions could complement government initiatives in achieving sustainability goals that benefited all of humanity. Standing at the podium in the UN General Assembly Hall, looking out at delegates whose decisions affected billions of people worldwide, I thought about Jessica's prediction that I would never recover from business bankruptcy. Her assessment had been more than simply wrong. It had been transformative in motivating achievements that conventional encouragement might never have generated. The journey from bankruptcy to the United Nations podium illustrated that entrepreneurial failure could be the beginning rather than the end of meaningful achievement. Jessica's skepticism had forced me to develop capabilities, resilience, and determination that ultimately enabled impact extending far beyond anything either of us had initially envisioned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.